I've not done anything to
Get in the car.
No, no. Help.
Are you kidding me?
Bro.
Get up.
Can you please get this on video? Please get this on video. No, please get this on video.
Get up.
That's my girlfriend, dog. No, no, that's my girlfriend.
Up.
I'm gonna check my pockets right now. But that's my girlfriend, dude. Why did you throw her down?
Get up.
Why did you throw her down?
She was pulling away from me.
Okay, so what is that? You're right. I don't
Get up.
on me.
The officer said he was resisting, but was he? Or was he just standing up for what he believed was right? A man in his own home, surrounded and restrained. The cries of, "I haven't done anything," grow quieter, more desperate, and still no answers come.
Refusing to let us talk to him who's covered in blood. She starts pulling away from me, and then that's what happens. I've been trying to get her in the car for 20 minutes now. She starts pulling away from me, so she has to get on the ground.
Hey man, we need to put her in the car. She fell down.
She needs to get in the car. Get up.
I don't like you. I don't like
You gotta stand up. Let's go. Get her
you.
up.
Hit her head pretty hard.
Get her up.
You might want to check her for concussion.
We have EMS on the way.
Girl, you gotta sit down. You have to sit down. How you pull? Don't know the
Yeah.
Outside, the neighbors look on, powerless to intervene. They called for help. But was this help or harm? Nobody knows who made the call. Nobody knows what they said. All we see is the aftermath: bruises, cuffs, and shattered trust. How did it come to this?
I don't know yet. No. EMS is checking him out.
Do you know who called?
No,
So,
right here. That's
are you familiar with these two?
No, all I know is that I think it's a rental property. I mean, I know I've seen them in and out of the house. I know that I've seen them there, but I don't know if they're the owners or the...
Hey, do you have
I'm trying to...
pictures?
I don't see anybody
Yes.
else here who could have called.
I don't know. They said they...
Did they call?
No. So they said they saw them... Well, they didn't see them. They heard them fighting, and then they saw them go in this
Their
house right here.
Right.
This story isn't just about one man. It's about all of us. It's about the boundaries between authority and overreach. It's about the rights that protect us and how fragile they can feel. If this can happen to him, what's stopping it from happening to you? Where do we draw the line?
I don't know if it was you.
It was me standing
And she
there.
starts pulling away from me again, so I have to take her down to the ground again. So, because the only reason for her to pull away from me is to get away.
Right.
So-
I'm just wondering who could have made that call. Is
I
there
have
a
no-
car in that house right there?
I have no idea. The caller
And it could have been somebody on that side.
The
'cause there's a
caller-
house right there.
the caller didn't tell us
Right.
who they were. Just,
Just
are you familiar with them at all?
Happening in the community because
And here's the truth. We have laws for a reason. The Constitution is there to keep power in check. But those laws only work if they're respected by those enforcing them. So, when officers cross the line, who holds them accountable? If we don't ask these questions, who will?
Okay, then we can leave.
Yes, ma'am. Then y'all can leave.
It's just my.
Is this your friend?
My best friend.
So she's
Leanne.
very intoxicated and she's going to jail. So she hasn't been searched. I couldn't get that. I literally just got her in the car before.
I think he punched like a window or something, and that's all that
So
I know.
that makes sense for the broken glass noise, but I'll finish filling you in over here. So
No, that's why, because
I found
The homeowner didn't ask for this. He didn't start this fight, but he refused to back down. He stood for his rights, and for that, he was handcuffed, silenced, and humiliated. His story matters because it could be any of us. When justice is ignored, we all lose.
I really
Okay.
it's wrong.
Do you have anything on you at all that would get you in trouble?
No.
Do you have any guns, drugs, knives, bombs, anything like that?
No.
Okay. Do you have any pockets on what you're wearing at all?
No.
Okay. So is this like a dress kind of thing or something like that?
Yeah. Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So because you are detained in handcuffs, we have to check you to make sure that you don't have any weapons or anything like that on you. Okay. So would you step out of the vehicle for me so I can use the back
I
of my
would,
hand and
but
check you?
I'm-
But you're gonna have to go back in the back of the vehicle. Okay.
Why?
Because you're under arrest
For what?
for obstruction.
Against what?
Again, obstruction of a police officer.
That's not fair.
Well, ma'am, when you refuse to comply, and when
Well,
they're
you
telling...
guys came to my house.
Yes, ma'am, because we received a phone call in reference to a domestic incident where we heard broken glass and we need to investigate the domestic incident, and you interfered with that investigation.
It's my house.
So, I'll ask you this. What would you do? Would you protect your home? Would you stand up for yourself? Or would you give in to the pressure, afraid of what might happen? It's a question we hope we never have to answer. But for one man, that night, it became his reality.
Well, when you're pulling away and resisting, that's doing something, okay?
I live here.
Well, you're still under arrest. Turn around and face the door for me, okay? You don't have anything on you, right?
No, I don't have
Okay.
anything
We're
on
just
me.
going to double check and make sure, okay? Are you hurt anywhere that you can tell right now?
No.
Okay.
I'm not hurt because by you searching me. I live here.
Okay. Have a seat for me again, okay?
What would I? It's not fair. This is so unfair.
Have a seat for me. Slide on in. Get your feet in the car, please.
Melissa.
Watch your head, okay? Watch your knees. So it doesn't look like there's any way for her to have anything on her or anything like that, because it looks like it's pretty much just a dress. I didn't feel anything bulging, anything like that.
Yeah, I just never got the chance with her.
No, you're good.
And now, the question we all need to ask. If the people sworn to uphold the law can break it, who stops them? When silence replaces accountability, justice isn't just delayed, it's denied. This story isn't over. It's a warning. Because our rights only matter if we fight for them. Ending? Question? What happens to justice when those meant to uphold it choose to ignore it? This isn't just one man's story. It's a reflection of a bigger problem. Our rights are the foundation of justice, but they mean nothing if we let them be ignored. The Fourth Amendment, the First Amendment. These aren't suggestions, they're protections. And if we don't speak up, if we don't hold those in power accountable, what happens next? Share this story. Demand answers. Because justice...
The footage begins in a moment that should be routine. Officers arrive at a residence following a call about a domestic disturbance. What unfolds over the next several minutes is not an investigation, but a masterclass in how law enforcement can manufacture crisis from cooperation, how requests become commands, and how the protection of rights transforms into grounds for arrest. From the initial door contact, something feels misaligned. The homeowner answers calmly, acknowledging the officer's presence. When asked about the disturbance, the response is direct and non-evasive. There was an argument. Voices were raised. The situation has resolved itself. This is the kind of information officers routinely receive, and in countless similar calls across the country, it marks the beginning of the end of police involvement. A brief conversation, perhaps a few follow-up questions, and officers clear the scene. But that's not what happens here. The officers immediately press beyond the initial explanation. They want to speak with another individual inside the residence. The homeowner declines. This is where the trajectory of the encounter fundamentally shifts, and it's critical to understand what's happening beneath the surface of this exchange. The homeowner is not refusing to cooperate with an investigation. He's exercising a constitutional right that exists precisely for moments like this: the right to control access to his private residence. The Fourth Amendment creates a boundary between state power and personal space. It requires warrants. It demands probable cause. It establishes that a home is not a public space where officers may move freely, but a protected zone where entry requires legal justification. When the homeowner declines the officer's request to speak with someone inside, he's not obstructing anything. He's invoking a protection that predates modern policing by centuries. Yet the officers respond as though his refusal is itself suspicious, as though declining to waive constitutional protections is evidence of wrongdoing. This interpretive leap, from rights assertion to suspicious behavior, is foundational to how this encounter escalates. The officers don't pause to reassess their legal authority. They don't explain what specific evidence gives them grounds to enter without consent. Instead, they reframe the homeowner's lawful refusal as an act of resistance. One officer states they are mandated by the state to speak with the individual inside. This language carries weight, implying legal obligation and official authority. But mandate and authority are not the same thing. Officers are mandated to investigate certain calls, but that mandate doesn't override constitutional protections. They still need consent, a warrant, or exigent circumstances that justify immediate entry. What's absent from this interaction is any articulation of exigent circumstances. The legal standard for warrantless entry into a home is high. Officers must have reason to believe someone inside is in immediate danger, that evidence is being destroyed, or that a suspect is fleeing. Raised voices in an argument that has already ended do not meet this threshold. The homeowner is standing at the door, coherent and cooperative in providing information. There are no sounds of ongoing violence. No one is calling for help. The dogs mentioned by the homeowner are described as being in the back of the residence, not presenting any threat or interference. By any reasonable standard, this is not an emergency. Yet the officers continue to press. Their tone shifts from request to insistence. The language becomes more direct, more commanding. When the homeowner again declines and questions why they need to enter, the response is not explanation, but repetition. The officers simply reassert their intention to speak with the other individual. This circular dynamic, request, refusal, insistence, refusal, continues without any legal or tactical development. The officers are not gathering new information. They're not building probable cause. They're simply escalating pressure. This is where the psychology of authority begins to override legal procedure. For officers trained to take control of situations, a citizen's refusal to comply can feel like a challenge to their authority. The interaction shifts from investigative to adversarial. The homeowner is no longer a source of information, but an obstacle to be overcome. This cognitive shift is subtle but profound. It transforms a consensual encounter into a confrontation, and once that frame is established, every subsequent action by the homeowner is interpreted through the lens of resistance. The homeowner asks if the officers have a warrant. This is not a provocative question. It's a direct application of constitutional knowledge. Citizens are allowed to know the basis for police entry into their homes. But rather than answer the question directly, the officers continue pressing. The interaction now includes references to needing to talk to him, without clarifying what legal authority compels this conversation or what specific evidence suggests a crime has occurred that would justify overriding the homeowner's refusal. Then comes the moment that crystallizes the power imbalance. The homeowner, still attempting to maintain boundaries, is told to open the door. Not asked. Told. The command is repeated with increasing force. The legal justification remains absent. No warrant is presented. No exigent circumstances are articulated. The homeowner stands firm, reiterating that this is his house and asking why the door must be opened. The response is not clarification, but threat. The tone suggests that refusal to comply will result in consequences. What's critical to understand here is how compliance itself has become the objective. The officers are no longer investigating a domestic disturbance. They're now focused on securing submission. The original call, the initial information provided, the absence of ongoing danger, all of this has faded into the background. What matters now is that the homeowner is not doing what he's being told to do. In the logic of the encounter, this non-compliance has become the problem to be solved. The demand to open the door escalates. The homeowner continues to refuse. The officer's frustration becomes audible. One officer states that the homeowner's refusal constitutes obstruction. This is a significant legal claim, and it's being made without apparent foundation. Obstruction of justice typically requires interference with an official investigation or the concealment of evidence. Declining to waive constitutional protections is not obstruction. Standing at your own door and asking questions is not obstruction. Yet the accusation is leveled as though the law is self-evident. This labeling is not just rhetorical. It's the beginning of a legal justification being constructed in real time. If the homeowner is obstructing, then force becomes defensible. If his refusal to open the door is criminal resistance rather than lawful rights assertion, then entry without a warrant becomes necessary to enforce the law. The officers are building a narrative that will later justify their actions, but they're building it on a foundation that doesn't meet legal standards. The homeowner asks for a supervisor. This is another lawful request. Citizens have the right to escalate concerns within the chain of command. But the request is dismissed. The officers don't call a supervisor. They don't explain why one can't be summoned. They simply continue demanding that the door be opened. The homeowner attempts to record the interaction with his phone. This is constitutionally protected activity. The First Amendment explicitly protects the right to record police in the performance of their public duties. Yet even this right is functionally ignored in the momentum of the officer's demands. Then, the door is forced open. The exact mechanics are less important than the fact of the breach. The officers enter the residence without consent, without a warrant, and without articulated exigent circumstances that would legally justify such entry. The moment that door opens without permission, a constitutional violation has likely occurred. Everything that follows stems from this initial overreach. The homeowner's shock is audible. He demands to know why this is happening. His questions go unanswered. Instead, officers move to physically control him. He's grabbed. His protests intensify. He's pulled. He shouts that this is his house, that he hasn't done anything wrong. The officers don't pause to explain. They don't de-escalate. They move directly to force. The homeowner is taken to the ground. His voice rises in distress. He's being handcuffed in his own home, and still no one has explained what crime he's suspected of committing. This is the point where the encounter has fully transformed from an investigation into a confrontation driven by enforcement momentum. The officers are no longer responding to the original call. They're responding to the homeowner's refusal to submit. The cycle has become self-sustaining. Refusal leads to force. Force leads to resistance. Resistance justifies more force. At no point does anyone step back to reassess whether the foundational justification for entry existed in the first place. The homeowner is now on the ground, restrained in his own residence. The officers have achieved physical control, but the legal and moral questions multiply with each passing second. What began as a knock at the door has devolved into a scene of forced entry, physical restraint, and escalating charges. The transformation is complete. A citizen exercising constitutional rights has become a suspect facing arrest. Understanding how this happened requires examining the precise mechanisms by which lawful resistance becomes criminalized and how officer discretion can override legal boundaries. The homeowner's voice carries a mixture of confusion and desperation. He repeatedly asks why he's being detained, why force is being used against him in his own home. These questions are not rhetorical outbursts. They're fundamental inquiries about the legal basis for what's happening to him. In any legitimate arrest, officers must be able to articulate the crime they believe has been committed and the evidence supporting that belief. Reasonable suspicion for a stop. Probable cause for an arrest. These aren't abstract legal concepts. They're practical requirements that protect citizens from arbitrary state power. Yet in this moment, no clear answer emerges. The officer's response is telling. The homeowner is informed he's being detained for obstruction. This charge has become the catch-all justification for everything that's transpired. But obstruction of what, exactly? The officers arrived to investigate a domestic disturbance that the homeowner acknowledged and explained. There was no ongoing violence. No one was prevented from speaking with officers had they remained outside and requested voluntary conversation. The only thing obstructed was the officer's desire to enter the home without legal justification. In the circularity of this logic, the homeowner obstructed an investigation by refusing to waive his Fourth Amendment protections, and that refusal then became grounds for the very entry he had lawfully declined. This is where the concept of manufactured resistance becomes critical. The homeowner didn't initiate conflict. He didn't threaten officers. He didn't physically interfere with their duties. What he did was maintain boundaries that the law explicitly grants him the power to maintain. But in the officer's framework, any assertion of rights that impedes their objectives becomes resistance. Once labeled as resistance, force becomes justified. Once force is applied, physical reactions, pulling away, verbal protests, attempts to maintain balance, become additional resistance. The cycle feeds itself, and each iteration provides retroactive justification for the previous escalation. Consider the specific language used throughout the encounter. The homeowner is told to stop resisting, to stop pulling away, to comply. But what is compliance in this context? It's not cooperation with a lawful investigation. He already provided information about the domestic disturbance. Compliance here means surrender of constitutional protections. It means opening the door without warrant or exigent circumstances. It means allowing officers to enter and control the situation despite lacking legal authority to demand such access. When compliance is defined as the abandonment of rights, then rights assertion inevitably becomes categorized as non-compliance. The physical escalation continues. The homeowner is repeatedly told to get up, to move, to stop touching officers. Yet he's handcuffed, restrained, and surrounded. His ability to comply with contradictory commands, stop moving, get up, don't resist, becomes impossible. This phenomenon is well documented in excessive force cases. When officers issue rapid-fire commands that cannot simultaneously be obeyed, any movement becomes justification for additional force. The person is placed in a no-win situation where compliance is structurally impossible and non-compliance is guaranteed. The threat of the taser enters the interaction. An officer warns that continued resistance will result in being tasered. The taser has become ubiquitous in American policing, often categorized as a less lethal option that provides a middle ground between verbal commands and deadly force. But in practice, the taser frequently functions as a compliance tool rather than a safety measure. It's deployed not to prevent imminent harm, but to compel obedience. The threat of its use transforms the interaction from an arrest into a coercion scenario. The message is clear: submit or experience pain. What's particularly troubling is the absence of any attempt at de-escalation. De-escalation training emphasizes slowing encounters down, creating space for dialogue, and reducing the emotional temperature of confrontations. None of that appears here. The momentum is entirely in one direction, toward increased control and increased force. The homeowner's questions go unanswered. His requests for supervisors are ignored. His attempts to understand what's happening are treated as additional resistance. The officers have committed to a course of action, and no amount of verbal protest or legal argument will divert them from it. The girlfriend becomes involved. Her presence introduces another dimension to the encounter. She attempts to intervene, to advocate for the homeowner, to document what's happening. Her actions are constitutionally protected. The First Amendment guarantees the right to observe and record police activity. It protects speech critical of law enforcement. It allows citizens to advocate for one another in interactions with state actors. Yet she, too, is met with commands and physical control. She's told to stop interfering, to move away, to comply. When she doesn't immediately submit, she becomes the next target of enforcement. The cycle repeats with disturbing precision. She pulls away from officers. This physical reaction, an instinctive response to being grabbed, is categorized as resistance. She's taken to the ground. Her voice rises in distress. She asks why this is happening. The response is the same as it was for the homeowner: obstruction. She obstructed by refusing to comply with orders that had no clear legal foundation. She obstructed by attempting to document the encounter. She obstructed by advocating for someone being restrained in their own home. In the expanding definition of obstruction being applied here, any action that complicates the officer's objectives becomes criminal. The girlfriend sustains visible injuries. She's described as having hit her head. Blood is mentioned. The physical consequences of the force applied are becoming apparent, yet the response is not reassessment but continuation. Medical assistance is called, but the detention continues. The injuries are treated as unfortunate side effects of necessary enforcement rather than potential indicators that the level of force applied exceeded what the situation required. This framing is crucial. If the injuries are simply consequences of lawful arrest, they're regrettable but justified. If they're consequences of unlawful entry and excessive force, they're evidence of misconduct. Throughout all of this, the original justification for police presence, the domestic disturbance call, has disappeared entirely from the interaction. No one is asking follow-up questions about what happened during the argument. No one is assessing whether any crime occurred. No one is investigating the actual incident that prompted the call. The entire focus has shifted to enforcing compliance with officer commands. The investigation, if it ever truly was one, has been abandoned in favor of asserting authority. The neighbors watch from outside. Their presence is documented in the footage. They're confused about what's happening. They don't know who called the police. They don't know what the original complaint involved. What they witness is chaos, broken glass, raised voices, people being restrained and injured. This is the public face of the encounter. Whatever internal justifications the officers may have, what the community sees is force applied against people in their own home without clear explanation or apparent justification. The question of who made the original call becomes increasingly important as the encounter progresses. The officers acknowledge they don't know who called. They received a report of a domestic disturbance, possibly involving sounds of fighting and broken glass, but the caller didn't identify themselves. The officers never verified the accuracy of the report before forcing entry. They never confirmed that the people in the home matched any description provided by the caller. They never established that anyone was in danger. An anonymous call, unverified and unsubstantiated, became sufficient grounds to override constitutional protections and enter a home by force. This reliance on uncorroborated calls creates a dangerous vulnerability in the system. Anyone can call police and make allegations. Those allegations can be false, mistaken, or malicious. If officers respond to every call by assuming its accuracy and acting without independent verification, they become instruments of harassment. A neighbor with a grudge can weaponize police response. An ex-partner can create chaos through false reports. The protection against this is the requirement that officers develop their own probable cause based on observable evidence, not simply execute enforcement actions based on anonymous tips. That protection failed here. The officers discuss the situation among themselves after both individuals are detained. The conversation reveals gaps in their understanding of what actually occurred. They piece together fragments: broken glass, possibly a punched window, arguments heard by an unknown caller. But none of this constitutes the kind of verified, specific evidence that typically supports forcible entry into a residence. They're working backward, trying to construct a narrative that justifies actions already taken rather than building probable cause before acting. One officer mentions that the girlfriend is intoxicated. This observation is presented as relevant information, but its legal significance is unclear. Being intoxicated in one's own home is not a crime. It doesn't justify arrest. It doesn't provide grounds for the level of force applied. Yet it's included in the post-incident discussion as though it explains or justifies the outcome. This reflects a pattern where officers catalog details that might retrospectively support their decisions without demonstrating how those details established probable cause at the moment entry was forced. The homeowner and girlfriend are both now detained, both facing charges of obstruction. Neither has been accused of the domestic violence that originally brought police to the scene. The investigation into whether any domestic violence occurred appears to have been abandoned entirely. Instead, 2 people are under arrest for the crime of not surrendering their constitutional rights quickly enough. The original potential crime goes uninvestigated while the enforcement of compliance becomes the sole focus of police activity. This inversion reveals something fundamental about how certain law enforcement encounters function. The objective is not always investigation or public safety. Sometimes the objective is simply the demonstration of authority. When citizens assert rights, challenge officer decisions, or refuse to submit to requests that lack legal foundation, the encounter becomes about re-establishing the power hierarchy. The arrest becomes punishment for the challenge itself. Obstruction charges become the vehicle for criminalizing rights assertion. The encounter has reached its conclusion. 2 people sit in police vehicles, detained and injured, facing criminal charges that didn't exist when officers first knocked on the door. The residence shows visible signs of the confrontation: broken glass, disturbed belongings, the physical evidence of forced entry and struggle. What remains now is the aftermath. And it's in this aftermath that the true scope of what occurred becomes clear. This isn't just about one violent encounter. It's about the systems that enabled it, the legal frameworks that failed to prevent it, and the precedents being set for future interactions between citizens and police. The officers conduct their post-incident assessment. They discuss what happened, comparing notes and establishing a shared narrative. This process is standard procedure, but it's also where the official story begins to solidify. The facts are arranged into a sequence that will appear in reports, that will be presented to prosecutors, that will form the basis for whatever charges are filed. In these conversations, certain details are emphasized while others fade into the background. The homeowner's refusal to open the door becomes central. The girlfriend's pulling away becomes evidence of resistance. The injuries become unfortunate but necessary consequences of lawful enforcement. What's largely absent from this narrative construction is any serious examination of whether the initial entry was legally justified. The officers don't revisit the question of exigent circumstances. They don't discuss whether they had sufficient evidence to override Fourth Amendment protections. They don't consider whether their escalation was proportional to the threat level actually present. Instead, the conversation focuses on what happened after entry was forced, the resistance they encountered, the force they had to apply, the obstruction charges that resulted. The foundational question of legal authority is treated as settled, even though nothing in the encounter actually settled it. This reflects a broader pattern in how police accountability functions, or fails to function. Once officers commit to a course of action, the institutional machinery tends to support that commitment. Reports are written to justify decisions already made. Supervisors review incidents through the lens of supporting their officers unless evidence of wrongdoing is overwhelming and undeniable. Prosecutors rely on police accounts when deciding what charges to file. Defense attorneys may challenge the narrative, but by that point, the official version has been repeated so many times in official documents that it carries the weight of established fact. The homeowner and girlfriend will have to prove that the officers acted unlawfully, rather than the officers having to prove their actions were justified. The burden of proof has shifted. The medical response adds another layer to the situation. Emergency services arrive to treat the girlfriend's head injury. She's described as intoxicated, bleeding, and distressed. The medical personnel are there to provide care, not to investigate how the injuries occurred. They treat the symptoms, the bleeding, the pain, but the cause is accepted as simply part of an arrest situation. There's no mechanism in this moment for medical providers to question whether the force that caused the injuries was appropriate. They're operating within a framework where police force is presumed necessary unless proven otherwise. The girlfriend becomes a patient with an injury, not a person who may have been subjected to excessive force. Consider what this means for accountability. Multiple systems interact with this incident: law enforcement, medical services, potentially the courts. Each system has its own focus and limitations. Police focus on enforcement and officer safety. Medical providers focus on treatment. Courts focus on legal procedures and evidence admissibility, but no system is specifically designed to examine, in the moment, whether the entire chain of events should have happened at all. By the time judicial review might occur, months may have passed, memories have faded, and the official narrative has hardened into something difficult to challenge. The neighbors remain outside, still unclear about what they witnessed. Officers speak with them briefly, trying to determine if anyone knows who made the original call. The neighbors don't have answers. They know the property is a rental. They've seen the occupants coming and going, but they don't know them personally, and they didn't witness any domestic violence. They heard something, maybe arguing, maybe breaking glass, but not enough to form a clear picture of what actually occurred inside the residence. Yet their vague impressions, filtered through an anonymous call, were sufficient to set this entire chain of events in motion. This reveals the fragility of the system. Police are asked to respond to calls from strangers about people they've never met, based on sounds or observations that may be misinterpreted or exaggerated. They're expected to investigate, but investigation requires patience, information gathering, and careful assessment of legal boundaries. When that process is short-circuited, when officers move directly from call to forced entry without establishing probable cause, the system breaks down. The protection that constitutional rights are supposed to provide evaporates. The legal concept of qualified immunity now enters the picture, though it's not mentioned in the footage. Qualified immunity is a doctrine that shields government officials, including police officers, from civil liability unless they violated clearly established constitutional rights. The standard is high. It's not enough to show that officers made a mistake or even that they violated rights. The violation must be so clear, so obviously unconstitutional, that any reasonable officer would have known it was wrong. This doctrine will likely become relevant if the homeowner or girlfriend pursue civil action. They'll have to prove not just that their rights were violated, but that the violation was so clear that officers couldn't reasonably have misunderstood the law. This is where the cycle of accountability failure becomes self-perpetuating. If courts grant qualified immunity because the specific circumstances of this case don't match previous cases closely enough, then officers in future encounters can claim they didn't know their actions were unconstitutional. The law never becomes clearly established because each case is deemed too unique to set precedent. Officers continue to act with broad discretion. Citizens continue to experience rights violations, and the legal framework continues to provide immunity rather than accountability. The charging decisions represent another critical juncture. Both the homeowner and girlfriend face obstruction charges. These charges will be processed through the criminal justice system, potentially resulting in prosecution, plea deals, or trial. But the validity of the charges depends entirely on whether the underlying police action was lawful. If officers had no legal authority to enter the residence, then refusing entry wasn't obstruction. It was the exercise of constitutional rights. If the detention was unlawful, then pulling away wasn't resistance. It was a response to false imprisonment. The entire legal framework inverts depending on whether that initial entry was justified. Prosecutors will have to decide whether to move forward with charges. They'll review police reports, possibly watch the Bodycam footage, and determine if they can prove obstruction beyond a reasonable doubt. But prosecutors work closely with police. They depend on officers for evidence in countless cases. This relationship creates institutional pressure to support police accounts and move forward with charges even when legal justification is questionable. Declining to prosecute might be interpreted as suggesting the officers acted improperly, which could complicate future cases and damage working relationships. So charges move forward. And the burden shifts to defendants to prove they were exercising rights rather than obstructing justice. The homeowner and girlfriend now face a choice that countless people in similar situations have faced. They can accept plea deals that avoid the risk and expense of trial, but require admitting guilt for crimes they may not have committed. Or they can fight the charges, spending money on attorneys, investing time in court appearances and risking harsher penalties if convicted at trial. This choice isn't really about guilt or innocence. It's about resources, risk tolerance, and the practical realities of a system where fighting back is expensive and uncertain. If they accept plea deals, the official record shows convictions for obstruction. The officer's actions are retroactively validated. Future encounters between these officers and other citizens will proceed under the assumption that forcing entry based on vague domestic disturbance calls is acceptable. The precedent is set not through judicial review, but through the absence of challenge. If they fight the charges and lose, the result is the same: validation of police action plus harsher penalties. Only if they fight and win does any accountability emerge, and even then, it's limited. A not guilty verdict means the prosecution couldn't prove obstruction. It doesn't necessarily mean the court found the officers acted unlawfully. The broader implications extend beyond this single incident. Every time officers force entry without clear exigent circumstances and face no consequences, the legal standard erodes a little more. Every time obstruction charges are filed against people who are asserting constitutional rights, the practical meaning of those rights diminishes. Every time qualified immunity shields officers from civil liability, the deterrent effect of potential lawsuits weakens. The cumulative effect is a system where constitutional protections exist in theory but provide little actual protection in practice. Training failures emerge as part of the systemic problem. Police academies teach constitutional law. Officers learn about the Fourth Amendment, about exigent circumstances, about the requirements for warrantless entry. But they also learn about officer safety, about taking control of situations, about the dangers of hesitation. When these lessons conflict, when constitutional restraint seems to conflict with tactical control, the culture of policing tends to prioritize the latter. Officers are rarely disciplined for being too aggressive, but they may face criticism for being too cautious. This creates incentives that push toward escalation rather than restraint. Supervision represents another failure point. Where were the supervising officers during this encounter? The homeowner requested a supervisor multiple times. That request was denied or ignored. A supervisor might have de-escalated the situation, might have questioned whether entry was legally justified, might have prevented the entire confrontation from spiraling into arrests and injuries. But supervisors are often reviewing multiple incidents simultaneously, responding to higher priority calls, or simply unavailable. The on-scene officers exercise their discretion, and by the time supervisory review occurs, it's after the fact. A review of decisions already made rather than guidance in the moment when it could make a difference. The community impact extends beyond the immediate participants. The neighbors who witnessed this encounter will remember what they saw. Their trust in police legitimacy is affected by observing force applied in situations where the justification isn't clear. Other residents in the neighborhood will hear about what happened. The story will spread, will be discussed, will shape perceptions. Some will side with police, assuming officers must have had good reasons. Others will see it as confirmation of their existing mistrust. The division deepens, making future police-community interactions more fraught and more difficult. The policy implications demand attention. Departments could implement requirements that supervisory approval be obtained before forcing entry on domestic disturbance calls where no active violence is occurring. They could require body cameras to be reviewed by independent oversight before obstruction charges are filed against people who were asserting constitutional rights. They could create genuine consequences for officers who violate clearly established constitutional boundaries, rather than relying on the high bar of qualified immunity to shield misconduct. But these reforms require political will, resources, and a commitment to prioritizing rights protection over enforcement efficiency. What happened in this residence represents a test of whether constitutional rights have practical meaning. The Fourth Amendment says one thing: The lived reality of this encounter demonstrated something else. The homeowner invoked his rights and was arrested for it. The girlfriend attempted to document the encounter and was injured and detained for it. The gap between constitutional theory and enforcement practice was never more clear than in the moment when that door was forced open without legal justification, and two people found themselves restrained in their own home, charged with crimes for refusing to abandon the protections the Constitution explicitly grants them. This is the cost when accountability fails, and precedent establishes that authority, once asserted, need not justify itself.